What carries you number one? What carries you number one? One more than what you carries you number one.
What carries you number one? What carries you number one?
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be jazz. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. I'm no qua, Osinachi. One man, Osinachi. I'm watching. Osinachi, mama, Osinachi. Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be jazz. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. I'm no qua, Osinachi. One man, Osinachi. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. Mama, Osinachi.
What wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
A ní wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, I'm no qua, Osinachi. One, Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi.
A ní wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, I'm no qua, Osinachi. One, Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi.
A ní wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré o, wọ́n kéré kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. I'm no kwa, Osinachi. One man, Osinachi. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi. Mama, Osinachi.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm not sure, is the organizer also here?
Okay.
I guess we are about time, so we are still here with two speakers. I'm not sure if the third speaker is going to be joining the panel. Can you hear me, everyone? Good.
Yes, we can. I can.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll just, can we start in a minute or so if the third speaker is going to be here? Otherwise, this is about 3 o'clock, and I think we can just start maybe in about a minute if the person is not here. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, so we'll just wait for 1 minute and then we'll start the session.
Okay.
All right, it's already 1 minute past, and if the third speaker is going to be here, I think the person is just going to join the session. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Oderindi. I'm at Lead City University here in Ibadan, and my research area is in digital religion, African history, and then migration. But today our panel is on religious and faith communities. And I believe religion is both a personal matter and a social reality. And in dealing with religion as a social reality, one is confronted by a confusion of categories and terminologies of difficulty. So we'll be talking about religious communities in this panel. What does that mean? And in the modern day religious community whereby faith is also being practiced online, now what does it mean for faith or believers all around the world? So beyond this general level, students of a religion encounter difficulty in conceptualizing community and in society. For example, some of the ancient states, from the Hebrew to the Yoruba, themselves as sacred communities, embracing a number of religious society. In the course of time, some of these religious society themselves have developed into religious communities, such as the Orisha devotion, Buddhism, Christianity, and then Islam. So I will leave it to the panelists to discuss their paper today. Who is going to be speaking first? I believe that's Damilola Mary.
Yes, you're right.
All right, so Yeah, I think I have your bio here, so I'm just going to go through. So Damilola
Okay.
Mary Awopegba is a master's degree graduate of the University of Ibadan from Religious Studies Department. She's confident and success-driven distinction graduate of the University of Ibadan. She has gotten years of experience and mentorship under the supervision of her lecturers, most especially the ones in comparative religious studies. She has contributed works to the academic world through her research studies done during her undergraduate studies in religious studies, where she researched female gender discrimination in Christianity, Islam, and African traditional religion in Nigeria. Going further, she also examined religious activities among Christians and Muslim inmates in Agodi Correctional Center in Ibadan for a master's dissertation. Damilola has a track record of achieving an excellent academic record. She also works in a graduate level position as the head of administration at the International German School in Ibadan. She's currently a project assistant on the project titled Using Interfaith Dialogue as a Tool for Promoting National Integration, a project that is funded by the TED Fund. And the other speaker is Margaret Daramola, who is a student of Amto University. She's studying English with a minor in history. She was awarded Mellon Mays undergraduate fellowship and the author of A Pathway Through Survival, a collection of poems which is published in 2021. Our research topic on Equal Yokes, a study of religious syncretism in African diaspora, is what we're going to be listening to today. And that work examines the middle ground between religion, African spirituality, and tradition, and provides an understanding of identity in African diaspora. Margaret Daramola will be applying for a doctoral program in the fall. So you're welcome to this panel, and then I'll give the floor to the first speaker to have a go.
Thank you very much. I appreciate. So I'm going to be sharing my screen now. Okay. Sorry. Okay. I'm going to be sharing my screen now. Okay. I hope we can see my screen.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm talking on ethnicity, interfaith dialogue, and social integration in Nigeria. As you already said, I'm a graduate of the University of Ibadan Religious Studies Department, a master's graduate. So going further, as you can see, the organized table of contents of what I'll be discussing. We can see the introduction, definition of ethnicity, interfaith dialogue, and social integration. And the next one is polarization of minority ethnic groups in Nigeria, multiculturalization and acculturation theory, interfaith dialogue as a tool for social integration in Nigeria, then the conclusion and then selected references. I hope we are following and my voice is very clear. Sorry, please, can you see my screen?
Yes, please go on, we can see the screen.
Okay, sorry, I'm trying to adjust the view. Yes, okay. The introduction to my study. Numerous studies have identified media to enable minority religious groups to be integrated into the systemic working of Nigeria without feeling of segregation by coming up with the theory of acculturation and multiculturalism. This can be complete acculturation or gradual to tackle the issue of social polarization happening to religious groups in Nigeria. Using these theories, studies about the culture, but do not categorically prefer the solution required for social integration in Nigeria. Therefore, the studies aims to explore the depth of the use of interreligious dialogue as a tool for social integration of minority groups in Nigeria, as it can also be a precursor to ending ethno-religious violence and discrimination between the minority and majority ethnic groups in Nigeria. Basically, what my study is all about is the ethnic groups in Nigeria, their majority groups and their minority groups. So this is introducing us to the polarization, the segmentalism, the discrimination that might be occurring as a result of the existence of a majority group and a minority group in Nigeria, which is our primary focus. So the polarization of minority ethnic groups in Nigeria has its foundations in the 1980s during the clamor for democracy. This has degenerated into what we have today. The Hausa Fulani ethnic groups are claiming dominance in major areas of the federation, such as the unequal distribution of the federal political dominance and the underground plan for the Islamization of Nigeria. So in essence, the Hausa Fulani group, according to study, constitute the majority ethnic group in Nigeria, and they are practically the majority in Nigeria, the majority ethnic group, and they are majorly Muslims. So there's this agenda of Islamizing Nigeria, and this concept, this religious ideology is about to dominate even every other ethnic groups in Nigeria. So going further with this study, so I'm going to, open her mind to see how this came to be. However, how can Nigeria overcome these challenges so as to enhance the integration of other ethnic groups in Nigeria alongside with the benefits that comes with it? Sorry, I hope you can follow what I'm...
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. Yes, so the definition of the keywords, definition of ethnicity, interfaith dialogue, and social integration in Nigeria. So I'm picking the keywords, trying to explain it so as to bring clarity to what I'm discussing. Sorry, I'm trying to minimize the PowerPoint. I'm sorry. Okay, yes. So in this presentation, I'll be looking at the major keywords, which are ethnicity, interfaith dialogue, and social integration. Ethnicity means the state of belonging to a social group that has a common national and social tradition. Also, ethnicity means a social group that shares similar and distinctive language, culture, and religion. So in essence, ethnic groups, they have similar ideology, orientation, culture, and religion. The term interfaith dialogue refers to the positive and cooperative interaction between people of different religions, faith, or spiritual belief, with the aim of promoting understanding between different religions to increase acceptance and tolerance. Social integration is the blending and unifying of social groups, different social groups who mostly come together in the segregation of races throughout history. Now, we are going to the major topics or themes around the polarization of minority ethnic groups in
Hello. Hello, Damilola. Margaret, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I think we have a problem with
national benefits and all, and religious benefits. So these are some of the factors. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we lost you at some point. Maybe you could start all over again from the polarization of minority ethnic groups. Are you there, Damilola? We seem to be having a problem with Damilola's connection. Damilola, are you there? What about Margaret? Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
I don't know what the problem is. Perhaps we should turn off our video. Maybe it would also encourage her to have a go at it. But we'll just wait until she comes on. I think we totally lost her now. Maybe she's gonna try to
Come back.
come back. Well, for the participants, I'm sorry that we're having technical issues. We'll just wait for Damilola to maybe try to reconnect. Well, maybe we can just have like a small discussion around what she's been talking about. Are you there, Margaret?
Yes, I'm there.
Well, I think I'm beginning to have an issue with our definition with ethnicity and the way she's categorized the classification of Hausa Fulani ethnic group being the dominant ethnic group in Nigeria. But I think religion has a trait that also weave a common thread around, for instance, national identities and ethnic identities. For instance, now in the north, you would find a Christian northerner who is perhaps a Fulani, and then although these people are minority, but then we can't just make assumptions that, well, because the Hausa Fulani are the majority in Nigeria, and hence they are supposed to be a Muslim. So that's what I've picked from the discussion so far, but I don't know if she's still trying. Are you there?
Okay, yes,
well,
I'm there. I'm so sorry. The connection went off. So I'm back now. I'm so sorry. Yes, so let me share.
I was just trying to, okay. Damilola, can you know what, we are just going to go off the video, so maybe that will give you an opportunity to also present your, I'm just going to stop my video now. Do you want to do the same, Margaret? Okay, thank you very much. So let's see if it's going to be better now. Yeah, I don't know, Margaret, have you been able to pick up anything from what she's been talking about on ethnicity, interfaith dialogue, and social integration in Nigeria?
Yes, I have been able to pick up, but I was really looking forward to hearing some more as to seeing where she was trying to go with her argument. And that's why I don't want to just jump into a conclusion.
Yeah, well, maybe, I mean, I don't know, before even going into your presentation, maybe we can just maybe talk about aspect of, is there any aspect of interfaith dialogue in your work, because you're dealing with the diaspora? Or is it strictly, are you back on?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
sorry.
So we are off the video, so I think that would help you, so you can just go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm sharing my screen right now. So sorry. I will just rush through whatever I'm doing.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so on the polarization of the minority ethnic group, let me just quickly explain. As I was saying further, there has been demographic studies, especially from United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. In 2015, they gave reports that the Hausa Fulani ethnic group, they constitute the majority of ethnic group in Nigeria, while the Yoruba, Igbo, Kanuris, and the likes, they share the remaining percentage among themselves. And this ethnic group, they are Muslims, they are Islams, no sentiments around Islam, but they are Muslims. And we know what is currently going on in Nigeria, that there's the agenda of Islamization of Nigeria. So certain scholars identified these tendencies, and it is also a form of religious dominance of an ethnic group over another, like trying to impose their religion on another. And in other aspects, or in the aspect of social distribution and federal distribution, I cited the example of educational system, in the sense that there are certain what's it called? There are certain data that showed that the northern part of Nigeria were not partisan to Western education initially. So they had to be given, over time, they were given this priority in federal schools and all that, so as to encourage them to have Western education. But eventually, it was seen that it was becoming more political, and it was affecting the even distribution of resources and in Nigeria. So this is what led to polarization, and so they are taking political dominance in elections and all those tendencies. But our major focus is the religious dominance, because other parts of Nigeria, there's a mix of other religions, most especially Christianity in the southern part of Nigeria. So it's more or less like the invasion of, or the domination of Islam in this is becoming prevalent, is becoming more obvious in other parts of Nigeria. So going further in my discussion, so I'm going to be discussing on the multiculturalization and acculturation theory that were propounded, or that were used to study the culture, the ethnic groups in Nigeria. The multiculturalization theory is also synonymous to acculturation theory, in the essence that acculturation is the adaptability and modification of an individual to a new environment, lifestyle. You see, acculturation, it's only emphasizes on the psychological, the sociological ideology about culture. It doesn't provide solution to the polarization of minority ethnic groups. It's just studying culture, okay, the psychological framing, the reaction, the conditions and all that. That is why we have the acculturation conditions in this part, acculturation of condition, which means the various, which refers to the resources behind acculturation process, antecedent conditions, which can include factors such as passive discrimination and situational context. Acculturation orientation, this refers to acculturation strategies, ties, mediators in the acculturation process, such as cultural maintenance, cultural adoption, or integration, marginalization, separation, and assimilation. This actually leaks deeper into, okay, how can this person maintain the newfound culture? Is just talking about the transition from one culture to another. So which does not give solution to what we are currently facing in Nigeria. So therefore, this leads me to the this leads me to address, sorry, on that multiculturalization and acculturation theory. I'm going to read this particular part, which says that, sorry, I'm trying to adjust the view. Okay. Yes. Most instruments are single-scale measures that are directed to specific groups. Many measures are short and aim of assessing acculturation outcomes. More often, behavioral adjustment and psychological outcomes, according to what I've explained. Acculturation conditions and orientation are less frequently addressed. In the reviewed measures, priority is given to both explicit behavior and preferences of immigrants, as well as in mainstream groups. Most measures show an adequate internal consistency information on cross-cultural validity of the measures and the applicability in other groups than the target group is scarce. This addresses the shortcoming of the theory. It does not give the solution to polarization of minority ethnic groups, but studies the sociological, psychological reasons for their behaviors. So this leads to another interfaith dialogue as a tool for social integration in Nigeria. So the reason why interfaith dialogue is coming up is because, you know, the Hausa Fulani ethnic group, being the major ethnic group in Nigeria, and the majority of adherents there are Muslims that practice Islam. So most of these people, they have an orientation, an idea, a preconceived notion, and they have their own religious belief, while others, minority group, also have their religious belief. So as an action plan, interfaith dialogue come as a tool which will enable interaction, conversation, communication, and education on the need for promotion of social cohesion between these different ethnic groups, both the minority and the majority ethnic groups. It will enable social integration. When there's communication about the lapses, the mistakes, the errors in a particular ethnic group, there will be need to just adjust, see things from the other person's point of view. Let's say, for example, we have, for example, in a particular religious person have a preconceived notion about another religion and is in that essence behaving violently to another person. But when dialogue comes in, it will change the orientation that, okay, I should behave in this way and apply whatever I know in my faith in the right way, or whatever my faith is saying. It will bring a form of interaction, and it will reduce religious violence, ethnic violence, because separating religion and ethnic groups, they come hand in hand. Religion and ethnic group, especially in the case of Hausa Fulani ethnic group, they are religious set of people. They are religious people, and you can't separate their religion as such and their culture from them. We have different organizations that promote interfaith dialogue and that serve as a template examples for Nigeria to follow. For example, the King Abdulaziz bin Abdulaziz International Center for Interreligious and Intercultural Dialogue, that's the KICIID. They have this was started by King Abdulaziz. So they promote interreligious dialogue in the global community, and they are known for emphasizing on interreligious dialogue, interfaith dialogue, and they've been able to make positive impact in the area of cohesion of different religious organizations, different religious orientation, and bringing them together to living in peace. We also have the Provincial Council of Interreligious Dialogue, that's the PCID, in conglomeration, like in unison with Vatican Council too. We will have conference. You see, the Vatican Council too, this council come together, to see how they can allow, liberalism, in the essence of, okay, this is Christianity, this is our faith, but what are the things that we can just see from other people's religion, just to be really liberal, just to accommodate others' religion, not conversion. It does not mean that they are going to be converted, but just to see things from other point of view and to understand other people's religion. So the Pontifical Council, in unison with the Vatican Council, to also promote interreligious dialogue, and they serve as a template which Nigeria can follow, especially with their policies, with their ideologies. So, and we have examples as well of interfaith conferences, like, for example, the 1978 Interfaith Conference that was held in Metropolitan Washington. They discuss on peace building, community building, nurturing understanding from different cultures and generations. So that's another example. And we also have many other examples, that promotes social cohesion and integration in Nigeria. Please, I hope we are following.
Yes, we are following, but you have just about 3 minutes left.
Okay, now, well, to recap what I've discussed or what I've spoken about, because this is the conclusion. Okay, please. To recap, inter-religious dialogue, I see it as a tool, like a useful tool, a useful medium which can promote ethnic cohesion, ethnic relations, ethnic unity. There will not be discrimination of, okay, this is a minority group, we are higher than you, we are more privileged than you, we have more resources than you, we are more religious than yourself. It will also allow different ethnic groups, to see things from different perspectives. Okay, why is this person behaving this way, or why is another person behaving in a certain way? So it will bring about mutual understanding between different ethnic groups. So my conclusion: in order not to marginalize minority ethnic groups in Nigeria, the guides provided by KAICIID, that's King Abdulaziz Religious Dialogue Organization, can be used as a template for encouraging religious dialogue in Nigeria. Also, historical methods used in conducting religious dialogue that have worked out should also be studied and incorporated where it is needed for religious dialogue in Nigeria. Please, okay. Religious crisis and ethnic-related violence are becoming more rooted every passing day by this discourse. But this discourse has been able to open our mind to know the prevailing issues in and on work on and on of the and one of the working methods that can be adopted in addressing ethno-religious issues in Nigeria. So this discourse has been able to open our minds to see that interreligious dialogue can serve as a good tool, for promoting unity among different ethnic groups, especially in the current prevailing political, religious issues going on in the country. Thank you very much. So these are the few references I've been able to gather together, although there are more in the full paper. So thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Margaret Damilola Olabi, for your presentation on ethnicity, interfaith dialogue, and social integration in Nigeria. I think before we go into some of the concerns that we have in your paper, we might as well allow Margaret Daramala to also do a presentation, and then we can discuss the two presentations at the end of her presentation. So I'll give the floor to Margaret to present. Good luck. So you have about 15 to 20 minutes, because I don't think we're going to have a third presenter, so you can take some time.
Okay. I'm going to be sharing my screen. You have to stop sharing, Damilola, so that I can share my screen.
Okay, sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm still sharing my screen. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Okay, I've stopped sharing. Sorry about that.
Sorry. It's just...
That's okay.
Wow. Okay, so here we go. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really my pleasure to be here today and to be able to present my research. My name is Margaret Darmola, and I am a last year student at Hampton University. This research paper project is a product of my Mellon Mays undergraduate thesis, and it's entitled Unequal Yokes, a study of religious syncretism in the African diaspora. And so although I'm going to be looking at the African diaspora, I do want to share a quote that just explains the concept of the importance of first looking within the African continent before even thinking about considering the African diaspora. And that is the concept of the Sankofa. This is an explanation of the Sankofa provided by Dr. Kubi Kwateng. And it reads, Sankofa represents a Ghanaian proverb. Always remember the past, for therein lies the future. If forgotten, we are destined to repeat it. The name Sankofa is a combination of two words, San and Kofa. The word San means go back and Kofa means get it. Put together, they mean go back and get it. The Sankofa bird teaches that it is necessary to dig deeper into our history as we seek to move forward. With an understanding of the Sankofa symbol, there is the possibility for individuals and groups to ask important questions about the past and remember the best of what the past can teach them. And so for research like this, like looking at religious syncretism, is extremely important to look at the past and to look at just African spirituality as a whole from past decades and generations before looking at how this has developed or emerged in the present. And so I'm going to go right into my introduction. I'm looking at religious syncretism in the African diaspora in the Americas, and also looking at some examples in Latin America and Europe. But mostly I'm doing this also because as the background that I have, I was born in Lagos, Nigeria, and I was raised in Switzerland in Europe. And then I moved to the United States to study at a historically Black university. And so I have a very holistic approach and view of religious syncretism. I've seen Christians practice Christianity in different ways from different angles. And from a very young age, I've just come to ask myself certain critical questions. And that's kind of what led to my research interest. And in my paper, in my introduction, I write that the study of religious syncretism in the African diaspora is the study of Black identity from the pre to the post-colonial era. One cannot claim to understand the African mind without first and foremost understanding what it is that the African man believes in. Africans are religious beings. They have always had a strong belief in the supernatural. Even those who claim to be atheists subconsciously practice elements of their traditional religions in their everyday life. African spirituality is embedded in African sociology because it is such a significant part of everyday life experience. It appears in subtle ways and finds ways to lurk into the church, the mosque, and day-to-day encounters. I argue that, which is my thesis, I argue that studying the way Africans in and out of the diaspora relate to spirituality while preserving their respective religions is fundamental to the understanding of their identity. And this is a crucial topic that ought to be studied in depth. And I know when we look at African spirituality, there's African spirituality from different African countries, but for the sake of precision, I do focus on the Yoruba ethnic group of Nigeria. And in order to be able to arrive to answer my questions, I pose very precise, I'd say, research questions. And I've decided to divide my research questions into three fundamental questions. And the first one is, in which ways have ideas from Yoruba-derived religions influenced Christian worship in the African diaspora? This question looks more at the intersection between the African spirituality and Christianity in the African diaspora and tries to find limits or like a middle ground or ways to separate. if possible. And then the second question, I look at what role has language and tradition played in the fusion or modification of Christianity in the African diaspora. This question deals mostly with language and just the notion of heteroglossia and the idea that language always evolves and has always evolved, especially within like the Yoruba community. Since colonialism, new terms have come, and how does this evolution of language then influence the way that we practice Christianity, or the way that Christianity is practiced in and out of the African diaspora? The last question, which is a relatively complicated question to answer to a certain extent, is how does one separate spirituality from religious affiliation while still preserving one's cultural identity? Something I've come across while doing this research, which is still ongoing, is that some scholars and people also argue that what they do is not really, they don't do it as a form of spirituality or religion. It's more just like them adhering to their culture. And to a certain extent that can be true, but really my research and my goal is to find out where one finds the limit, how one finds the limit, and can one find a middle ground or a limit? Where do we draw the line? And to arrive to these research answers, I use a mixed methodology of qualitative and quantitative methods. For my qualitative methods, I do take into consideration oral history. I know that as like historians and in our field, written history is usually like, it's usually considered more valuable or more important, or just, you know, has more weight. But for a project like this one, oral history is extremely important because it allows me to take into consideration the voices of the people we may not usually hear in history, or just like traditional experiences, and not always take a perspective that comes from the outside, an outsider looking in, and then trying to define what our experiences are as Black people, as Africans, but instead looking specifically at oral history, speaking to elders and having them testify to what their experience is. And then also I look at literature. Some of the authors I focus more on are the traditional Achebe, Soyinka, and also Toni Morrison and W. Du Bois. And I look at literature because it's very important in a project like this one to consider what Africans have written in their own experience, because for a very long time, the only way we had to really hear African experiences was through literature. And even to this day, it's still the case to a certain extent. And then lastly, for my qualitative method, I do take into consideration autoethnography. Like I previously said in my introduction, I was born in Nigeria, I was raised in Europe, and I now study in the United States. So I do have a holistic understanding and perspective of what religious syncretism is, being the fact that I have lived in these different continents and I have seen it firsthand, and I've had different experiences, spoken to different people. And so I do take those experiences into consideration when doing my research. And then for my quantitative methods, I use just the regular archives, looking through what has already been written in history, and also digital humanities. Now, I just wanted to clarify that I will be looking at the Christianity. When I look at religious syncretism, I look at the Christianity that was brought to Africa through missionaries, predominantly in the 19th century. But I did want to clarify, just for some context, that there is indeed an early form of Christianity that is already in the continent before it ever arrives to Rome, even though that is not the predominant Christianity that we know, or the one that I will be focusing on. I did want to draw that line because it's very important to have that in mind and not think that as we're talking about these themes with talking about a white man's religion, we need to destroy that notion, because indeed the early church fathers, Tertullian, Origen, Athanasius, and Augustine, were all African men. And in a book by Thomas C. Ogden, it's called In How Africa Shaped the Christian Mind, he really explains how the movement was a movement from south to north and not the opposite way as we're usually thought. And also the early churches of Alexandria in Egypt and Lalibela in Ethiopia were all in Africa. Here you have a picture of an Ethiopian man holding an African Bible that has never been translated before, and also the early Church of Lalibela that is also in Ethiopia. So just going on to some of my findings, I wanted to first and foremost start by the understanding of the gap that we have, or the gap that can be found in African spirituality and with Christianity. In God in Yoruba belief, Bolaji Idowu really tries his best to set and explain what the definition of the deity is to the traditional Yoruba. And then with the Bible, we see what it means to Christians and with historical books. So in the Ifa and Orisha religion, we see that Olodumare created the world in 4 days and he rested on the 5th day. While in Christianity, God created the world in 6 days and he rested on the 7th day. Orunmila was with Olodumare during creation, and God said, "Let us make man in our own image," implying that he was not alone during creation. And then also the role of Orunmila is to consult, to guide, and to direct. The role of Jesus Christ is similar, although in Christianity it has a little bit more layers to it. And in the Ifa religion as well, heaven used to be close to the earth, yet man sinned, and that caused a separation. And in Christianity, Adam sinned, which caused a separation between God and man. And so it's important to understand that when Christianity was brought into these spaces, the traditional Yoruba already had their own definition of what of what the deity was, of what God was, of what spirituality was. And so trying to bring a new concept while preserving a foreign language while preserving the same language is sometimes complicated. And in my research paper, I write that naturally after colonization, new terms were brought to Yoruba land and a mixed emerged. Perhaps the original meaning of the name Olodumare now carries a different meaning to certain people depending on the context. If, however, the practices remain the same, it is hard to say that the meaning has evolved. Additionally, the idea of deity was not foreign to the Yoruba when the colonizer brought his form of Christianity to West Africa. They had a profound understanding of Christianity already. Therefore, introducing a foreign concept while keeping a familiar language only causes confusion. The God of Israel, who sent his only begotten Son to die for our sins to be redeemed, is not the same God described by the indigenous Yoruba, nor is he the same one who sent Oduduwa to carry Olodumare's message. It is a fundamentally different religion with different practices and sources, yet very often they are used interchangeably. And this leads me to one of the examples. There are many examples, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to be able to go through all of them. And one of the examples in just the mode of prayer, in a lot of African and Nigerian churches, we hear this idea of praying and saying, "God of thunder, fire my enemies. God of thunder, send down fire upon my enemies." And when asked where this comes from, a lot of them argue and say that it comes from God of Elijah, send down fire. God of Elijah, send down fire in the house of my enemies. But that is also something that can be taken out of context, because in the biblical example, the God of Elijah was not sending down fire to punish anyone or to fire anyone. He was sending down fire to prove his ultimate glory and to prove that he was God above the God of the prophets of Baal. And so within the biblical context, the Bible actually says that you should love your enemies, bless those that curse you, do good to those that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. And yes, indeed, there is this idea of God's wrath and God being a God of vengeance, but it's not necessarily in the context that we tend to hear it in some churches where it says, "God of thunder, send down fire." That is something that actually comes from the Yoruba traditional belief. Another example that I wanted to point out was just the concept of reincarnation. A traditional Christian does not believe in the concept of reincarnation, or at least not the concept that when we die, we come back as someone else. However, in African spirituality, Yoruba religion, that's something that's more prominent. And so when a Christian, for instance, names his child Babatunde or Iyabo or Yetunde, that is in a way adhering to that concept of reincarnation, subconsciously also, because like I said previously, it may just be an element of culture. Babatunde, for those of you who are not Yoruba or who don't understand, translates to father has come again. And it's this idea that when a father dies or a grandfather dies within the same season a child is born, that child is like a reincarnation of the father. It's like the father has come again. And so I just say that the concept of reincarnation is not a Christian concept, yet many African Christians subconsciously adhere to it by giving their children such names. And again, I know that not everything has to do with the spirituality or the religion, and some of it just has to do with culture, but which is really where my research questions come in, and the importance of these questions come in. Like, where is the limit? Where do we find this? Where do we draw this line, and how can we draw this line? And so now looking more at like the African and African American experience, or the African adaptation to the New World, we all know the story of slavery, and that most of the slaves that were taken from the West Africa were brought to the Americas, North America, the West Indies, and South America. And during this time, a lot of them, as we know, were not allowed to practice their religions, were not allowed to have their own form of spirituality, or their own identity and spirituality, because Christianity was forced upon them. And so what they did was that they found ways to kind of practice a form of syncretism, and to practice their own traditional religions, and while making the slave masters believe that they were preserving Christianity, so to a certain extent. And here in the book by Toni Morrison, *A Mercy*, which is actually a part of my literature review, she really discusses the identity of two characters, Lena and Rebecca, who really find a way to adhere to religious syncretism by their experiences, by the way that they adapt to the environment. One claims to practice Christianity, but actually practice elements of her traditional belief and traditional religion, because it's her way to hold on to her identity. And then we also see the example of the Santeria in mostly in Latin America, or Candomblé, where a lot of the slaves, when they came, they had to find ways. They thought they had to find ways to still practice their traditional religion while still making the slave masters believe that they had converted to Catholicism. And so they gave new names to the saints there. And this is a religion that is still apparent today. And this is like a blending and a religious syncretism. And then also in my research, I talk a lot about Du Bois' idea of double consciousness. And I am essentially saying that this idea of double consciousness is not only a social idea or social reality, it's also one that is apparent in religion, in their religious identity. The scholar W.B. Du Bois is known for his theory on double consciousness, where he describes the African-American conflict of identity. He states, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a word that looks an amused pity. This is the idea that even though they are in the Americas, they're never fully African, or they're never fully American, and they're always one or the other. Interestingly, this double consciousness is not only apparent in social settings, but it also appears in African American relationship to religion. I argue that the African American is even prone to a triple consciousness. Not only does he constantly live in a world torn between his African identity and his American identity, but he has also somehow over the years of developing in a foreign land, strived to find his own identity, which operates as a perfect mix between both. This African identity does not stand without his American identity, and his American identity is not existent without his African heritage. Essentially, he is neither fully one nor the other. Therefore, he thrives to find himself in what Du Bois calls the talented tenth. And the talented tenth also has an element of religious syncretism attached to it, because when Africans came to the New World, they had to find and be attached to like a new identity and find something completely new, but they still had their own religion to hold to. Over the years, they've had to adhere to this concept of the talented tenth, which also has elements of religious syncretism tied to it too, in a way. Here we have an example of Greek life in the African American church, and Greek life alone has elements of religious syncretism attached to it, because it's like Greek spirituality, and then there's some elements of Christianity in it. So it's very mixed, but then also it being within the church, it also shows that syncretism is just very much apparent in everyday life, and it's very much a part. And in order to be able to understand where the limits are and be able to find ways to dissect, one really has to understand the identity of Africans, the identity of African Americans as well. And so just to conclude, I say that understanding religious syncretism is fundamental to understanding African identity in and out of the diaspora. African spirituality is an essential part of African development in the New World. People of African descent have often found ways to preserve their cultural identity in a way that sometimes merges with a subconscious adherence to their traditional religion. And these are some of my references. Of course, not all of them are there, but we just see some of them. And yes, thank you for listening. If you have any further questions after our Q&A, feel free to reach out to me. You can email me, text me, or visit my website for more information. I'm also on social media if you would like to connect. And once again, it was my pleasure to be able to present at this conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Margaret. I think it was really nice to hear about your title, which is on Equal Yokes, a study of religious syncretism in the African diaspora. I love different elements that you have presented in the paper. But before I go into your presentation, I would like to ask the participants if they have any question for either of the presenters, since we are not having the third presenter here. So if there's any questions from the listeners, can you just please put up your hands or just write in the comment section. But I'm not just going to wait for that. While the questions keep coming in, I would start with Damilola, the first presenter. I'm just going to have a little conversation around what you've presented and a few questions, and then if someone has any questions, I'll take it out as long as we go. Thank you for your presentation. I think it was quite interesting to hear about interfaith, the question of ethnicity, interfaith dialogue, and social integration in Nigeria. However, I was hoping that I was going to hear some more about this plan of Islamization about a particular section of the country. As you know, there was also this idea of the RCCization of Nigeria as well. And so maybe if you want to respond to that. So my point is that it is not just from one section of the country that this idea of, wanting to religionize the country is coming from, but it's also coming from the South as well. And then it's not all Hausa Fulani that is also Muslim as well. And I was wondering, since your theory of multiculturalization and acculturation doesn't really fit, I'm wondering whether you're going to consider other theories. Additionally, I was hoping that you might also talk about the online dimension to interfaith dialogue. You talked about preconceived notions, which might inhibit interfaith dialogue in the physical setting. For instance, when you're stuttering, it might, people might misconstrue you when you're having an interfaith dialogue, or shaking of hands, for instance. So I wonder whether you're exploring the online dimensions to interfaith dialogue, because it reduces all of these biases, you see. So when you're having like a meeting, an online meeting like this, there is no courtesy of maybe shaking hands if you're a female, or and then a female Muslim who wants to shake hands with a male Christian, you know. So things like this. So I'm wondering whether you are thinking about that in your paper. So I'll just leave you to respond to that. If Margaret also wants to say anything about the paper, I know you were about to have a conversation about that. So you can, you know. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for your observations. And yes,
I
think these are...
sorry, I was hoping Margaret would add to it, and then you can respond.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Okay, she can go ahead.
Thank you, Damilola, for your presentation. I do agree with what Peter did share. It would have been good to have maybe some better like examples or of how this is also represented today. And also just a tip when sharing PowerPoint, it's easier for your audience when you're not touching the screen or changing the screen. But as for the presentation, I think it was very insightful. I did have like learn a lot through that, but I do agree with what Peter, the feedback that Peter gave you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Margaret and Peter Alderete. Yes, I've noted the observations and they are a good one. They are good ones. So I'm going to incorporate them more into my research and places where I need to, add. And I'm going to incorporate them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, over to you, Margaret. I think that was just a piece of incredible presentation. I think I enjoyed it so much. But I have some concerns, as regarding some of the things you talked about regarding, let me see, I think I put it down, parental syncretism, you see, and reincarnation. And I'm wondering if it actually should be the problem of the child. For instance, myself, I bear Peter. Sometimes I don't like people calling me that name. I prefer my other names. And I'll be like, well, if I was at my birth, I probably would have, disagreed with them calling me Peter, So, so for this category of people who didn't have a choice, I mean, all children didn't have a choice when they were being given these names to. So I don't know if you're also considering that complexities for some people who have now, are adults now, and then they don't feel that, like this name, I have some relationship to it, even though, well, I feel a little bit Christian. I'm an agnostic, for instance, because I bear Peter, I have that tradition. But then, based on my ideas now, I don't relate with so much of Christianity or religiosity in that sense, but I still bear Peter, you see. So I don't know if I should carry, that shoulder, that weight along, since I'm not a religious person. That's one. And then the other one would be on your methods. I think you talked about what I'm probably most interested in is the digital humanities aspect, because you just said it in loose terms, and I was wondering what you meant by that. So you might as well, like maybe clarify that. And perhaps I think I have one last one about, it's a question really. Yourself, I think you use your biography so much in your presentation, and I'm wondering, this identity that you talked about, and I'm wondering to what extent does accent has a role to play in whether you feel, for instance, yourself, your name and maybe your appearance shows that you're from the southwest part of Nigeria, but then when you speak differently because of your background and the places you've been. I wonder to what extent does accent play a role in your presentation, basically. That would be it for me.
Thank you so much for your questions, Peter. So before I go on to try to answer some of the questions, I don't understand the third question. So I'm gonna ask if you could explain it a little bit better. The one about accent.
Okay. Well, I was just saying that if you were here, you'd probably be speaking like me, for instance, or maybe like Damilola, for instance. But then we bear the same names. So I wonder what role it plays in identity when it comes to syncretism. What role does accent play in that sense? I don't know. You don't have to answer. You know, it's just a question.
Okay, so yeah, I don't think I'm going to answer that. Maybe I'll take some more time to think about it or to try to see what you mean. So for the concept of reincarnation, in the presentation, I was not talking about the child practicing syncretism by bearing that name, but it was more about while the parents, if they are Christians and they give that name to the child, it can be a subconscious adherence to religious syncretism because subconsciously they're carrying this concept of this element of their tradition. Quite frankly, it's the tradition to call a child Babatunde or Iyabo. It's not necessarily that they believe that the child is coming back as the father, but it's the tradition. But at the same time, they're Christian, and so by mixing both, they are subconsciously, in a way, practicing religious syncretism, even though in their heart they may not believe in reincarnation. The fact that they are giving their child that name is a subconscious practice of their African spirituality in a way, because African spirituality is not simply a question of set of religions that one follows or a set of rules that one follows. It's something that really embodies the cultural aspect, the relationship to politics, how we relate to people, how we go up into our day-to-day activities. It encompasses a lot of the everyday life. You know, it has a lot of weight, and that's what I'm saying. When that was just an example to show that when we give that name, in a way, it's like it's showing that okay, there is sometimes a weight to it, and the child that you gave the example of your name being Peter, although you are not Christian. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is not necessarily your fault. That's about like what your parents called you. But then if you feel like your name is not a name that you should carry, or a name that you like, or you feel like it's a name that is having a weight on you that you don't want, it is still a possibility to change that name. Whether Peter or Babatunde or Yetunde, that is still something that you have, once you go up, the possibility to alter. And then for digital humanities as quantitative data, it was more the idea that when looking at how Christianity, or how like the slaves were brought to the Americas, it's more looking at numbers and how many converts, how many people converted versus how many people preserve their own traditional religion. It's a relatively new method that does provide numbers and some more quantitative data. I wanted to try and find a middle ground between both, and not simply say that, oh, in South Carolina, these people, because like in South Carolina, there's there's the village of Otunji, I believe it's called, and they are more like Ifa, and they practice more of like that religion. But I don't want to just say, oh, here these people practice that, and here these people practice that. But I wanted to come with more concrete numbers.
Yeah, I'm just interested in this model that you're talking about. Is it an application? What is it that you use in knowing these numbers, actually? So
it's a website that provides it. I have to look at
that's exactly what I mean by.
Oh yes, sorry. I can
Yeah.
I can email it to you later if you
Oh, okay. Thank you. Do you have anything you wanted to say to Margaret Damilola?
Okay, yeah, I actually have it's is it an observation, or I don't quite agree with maybe a particular part where she mentioned, interchanging the maybe name and secret as secretism. I'm trying to like relate the whole thing, like if you're bearing Babatunde, or if you are doing something like you carry syncretic practices with you everywhere you go and all that. Well, I think there's a thin line between culture and syncretism. There's a thin line between them, and it does not mean for the fact that you have a cultural practice or you have a cultural belief, or should I put it this way, there's African traditional religion, there's culture, and there's syncretism. If you can just place and interwoven, but if you can place a thin line between these things, we'll be able to understand that sometimes bearing a particular name can be cultural, not necessarily a religious name. Do you understand? So I think that's my observation concerning that part.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very
Oh,
much.
sorry, I wanted to respond, but
Oh, no, you can't.
You can if you want to.
oh
You
yes,
can.
actually I did, because I agree with you, and that's just the essence of my research, finding where that thin line is.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay.
I think I'm just going to add a few concluding remarks to what intercultural communication is.
Okay.
In the past, intercultural communications were occurred through face-to-face communication, mostly restricted to certain members of the society. But as the world became globalized, the need for intercultural communication has also been increased to create a conducive, progressive, and peaceful world. Under the influence of globalization, the intercultural communication and cooperation between communities and countries become more and more frequent. And intercultural communication across cultures in which values, beliefs, standards, knowledge, moral, laws, and behaviors shared by individuals and societies should be taken into full consideration and plays an important role in the world of communication, trade, business, and the development of cooperation and friendship between countries. At the same time, people should know that religion, which conveys impressive cultural connotation, is not only a kind of particular belief, but also a kind of universal cultural phenomenon. We should recognize the influence of religious belief on different cultures because it will contribute to intercultural communication and cooperation around the whole world. Moreover, religious beliefs will strengthen mutual understanding and create harmonious human beings around the world. So I would ask if the audience has any question. I'm not seeing any questions from the audience. I hope they are listening. If there's nothing coming from the audience, I think that will be the end of our panel. I want to thank both of you for your wonderful presentation, and I hope you can further develop your paper or your thesis as the case may be. So yeah, feel free to also email me for any concern that you may have. So thank you very much once again for your time. And thanks to LSA for organizing this wonderful conference and this panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, hold on. There's a question. Femi Awu Igba, do you wanna? Yeah, can you ask your question? Are you gonna? Hello, Femi. Can you come up with your question? I can see your hands being raised.
Okay.
Let's just like hold on a minute.
Okay.
If Ms. gonna. Yes, of course. Go ahead and speak, Femi. Are you muted?
I think so. I think from the official connection, it is muted.
Ah,
So you can only type your question.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, he has written the question. So he says, thank you, Damilola and Margaret, for the wonderful presentation. So thanks to you guys both. My questions to Margaret. First, you used the Yoruba and showed how religious beliefs in Yoruba religion rub off on Christianity. But then, I think there's need for a distinction between the Yoruba culture and Yoruba religion and how they both rub off on Christianity. That's one. And it says, you talked about religious syncretism and identity. Would you mind explaining the relationship between religion and identity? How does religion influence our sense of being, that is / identity? So yeah, over to you, Margaret.
Thank you, Damilola, for your question. When we look at African spirituality and when we look at Africans as just inherently religious beings, we have to take into consideration what African spirituality is and means to them. The philosophy of African spirituality is known as being like a continuum. It's a relationship between the unborn, the born, and the living, and it always evolves and it always grows. And when we look at Yoruba people specifically, they have a relationship to their spirituality and to their religion that is very strong and that transcends through even more than just their religious devotion. It has and it influences the way that they dress, the way that we respect our elders, even the way that we are in general. And so it has a lot to do with our identity. And when I look at, for instance, how this transcends in the diaspora, I see that this element of identity is still present, even though some people may have other religions other than the Ifa religion, but some elements of this identity is still present, whether Muslim, Christian, or even atheist. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Okay. I think Peter is muted. Okay, I think Peter is muted. Peter, we cannot hear you. Like, we can't hear you. You are muted.
Okay. I think, Peter, you're on now. You can talk.
No, you were muted. So I was thinking you. Yes.
Myself.
Yes.
Okay. Well, since we are not getting any response from Femi, we might as well just. Femi, are you there? He's here, but we are not getting anything from him.
Okay.
In any case, you can send your questions as email to the presenters. They will, of course, respond to your questions. So thank you very much. I appreciate you guys. Bye, and thanks to LSA as well. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.